Your Academic Skills Center presents this video series to help you strengthen your statistics skills.
Hello STAT students, and welcome to the video presentation for visual displays of data. My name is Janine Allwright, and I am the instructional specialist for the Academic Skills Center here at Walden, where I lead the statistics tutoring team. In this video presentation, I will examine the different ways that you can display data to tell the story of the data. I will briefly explain the difference between the sample and the population to help you remember that we are describing variables from a sample data set. We will review the levels of measurement again, as they determine which graphs are specifically appropriate for categorical versus continuous variables. I will show you how to create graphs for both levels of measurement in SPSS with an example data set. Lastly, I will share how to save your work in SPSS, and we will look at posting graphs in Blackboard, and I will share tips on how to get that done. Let's get started. On the screen, you see a figure that you will become very familiar with during this presentation series. It shows the relationship between the sample and the population and what that means for inferential statistics. The purpose of statistics is to answer research questions about the greater population, and for that we make use of a limited sample. Populations are often too large to examine in detail, so we use a sample data set as a stand-in. Later on in this series, we will engage with inferential statistics, but at this moment, we are describing these sample variables in a graphical way. Now, to that end, let's familiarize ourselves again with the levels of measurement, as they are important because different levels of measurement require different kinds of graphs and different kinds of descriptive statistics. Categorical variables exist of nominal and ordinal variables. Continuous variables include interval and ratio, but SPSS calls these both levels scale. Now, I recommend that you select a few variables and that you include at least one categorical variable and one continuous variable, as the graphs are different for those different kinds of levels of measurement. You really want to show off your skill set by adding a categorical variable and a continuous variable. I recommend one graph per variable. There's no need to put them together in one graph. We're truly describing one variable at a time. Now describe your variables in words and with a graph. And make sure that you explain what that variable is, talk about the name of the variable, what the label stands for, what the groups entail when you're talking about a categorical variable, what the level of measurement is, and so on. Lastly, I want to encourage you to explain your graph choice so that you can share with your reader what graph choice fits with that specific variable. Now let's start with the categorical variable. As I mentioned, it helps to describe your variable in words, but I can also show you how to add a percentage or the complete sample size of the groups for that variable in the graph. I recommend adding a bar or a pie chart, depending on how many levels you have in that categorical variable. For those of you who have reviewed the skill builders, you probably read that a pie chart is mostly appropriate when you have less than 4 levels, and a bar chart is appropriate when you have more levels than 4. The pie chart is a chart that shows various slices. You do not want to have too many slices in that pie chart because then it really becomes difficult to decipher. You can always supplement your categorical variable with a frequency table. That is not a table I'm going to show in this video presentation, but we will tackle that in the next video when we talk about variables in a statistical way. And of course, we always talk about social change. Now let's move our presentation to SPSS, where I will show you a sample data set, and we can produce a couple of graphs for categorical variable. This is an example data set from the CDC. It's actually called the Behavioral Risk Factors Surveillance System. And this data is collected with telephone surveys about US residents regarding health-related risk behaviors, chronic conditions, and use of preventive services, healthcare, and so on. This is not a data set that I presented to you on the previous video, but it always helps to familiarize yourself with other data sets. Again, this is a real data set, and we will interpret the social change here as well. As I mentioned before, I think it's best that you evaluate the levels of measurement for each variable, as you cannot really trust the measure that the researcher entered here. I wanted to create a graph with you for the categorical variable called gender. And this variable is called respondent sex on this data set. Let's check the ellipses, the 3 dots, to make sure that this truly is a nominal variable. And indeed, we have 2 groups here, males and females, that cannot be ranked. So this fits with the nominal choice for a categorical variable. For this variable, we create a quick pie chart. And there are 2 different ways to create graphs. The chart builder is a rather advanced method. I think you are better off using the legacy dialog as it is more intuitive. And you don't really need to build charts here from scratch. If you notice the distinction here between those areas, you see these first 6 graphs are separated from the next 3 with a thin line. That tells you that these first 6 graphs are appropriate for categorical variable. I'm not going to discuss the middle graphs here, but at the bottom you see the histogram, and that is an appropriate variable for the continuous variable that I will present later in this video. We're going to make a nice pie chart of that gender variable. For that, I click on pie. I can just accept the define box. I can always make my variables better viewable by increasing the size of this outside box. You have full control over that. And here is my gender variable. Now you can recognize that it is a categorical variable because it has those 3 balloons. And the ordinal variables have 3 bars here. The metric stick belongs to variables that are continuous. I can bring my respondent sex over. I can pull it either and drag and drop it and put it in the define slices box. Or alternatively, you can work with the arrow and bring your variable over that way. Now, I like to see the percentage of cases on graphs because the number of cases, the n, has less value for me. And I can share with you, it's just difficult to read graphs when the total number of cases is in it and those numbers are close to each other. I think it's better at a glance to just work with the percentage of cases. So I'm going to ask SPSS to present that in percentages for me. I click OK, and my output file comes up here. We can drag that a little bigger. And here is my pie chart. Now you can see that this pie chart does not have the percentages in it, but I can double click inside this, double click to activate the chart editor, and you can see that the chart editor came up now. And I can ask SPSS under the element function to show the data labels. If I had not clicked the percentages there, the total number of males and females would reveal themselves here, but at a glance I can see, even color-wise, that the female group is the larger group here, and the blue group, the males, is the smaller group in this variable. This is a nice way to present a categorical variable for less than 4 levels inside that variable. I can close the chart editor now, and my original graph will have taken on these percentages. Now let's look at another variable that has more than 4 levels. And for that, I'm going to work with marital status. When I click on the ellipsis, all the groups reveal themselves. I have 6 different groups here, 6 levels, as we say. So I'm going to produce a bar chart for this variable, as a pie chart will be a little too busy. I can cancel out this, click on Graphs, Legacy Dialogues, Bar. Simple will do. It's already selected by default. Click Define. I'm going to bring my variable over, marital status. I'm going to drag it into the category axis box. And again, I'm going to ask for percentage of cases, like we did with the pie chart. I can click OK, and the graph will produce itself. Now, there are a couple of comments I want to make here first. I mean, just like we did with the pie chart, I'm going to have to click inside here to retrieve those percentages. Click on Elements and ask for Show Data Labels. Once they've placed themselves in there, I can close the chart editor, and I can see now that this graph has taken on these percentages. And sometimes it's difficult to see the length of certain bars. For instance, is the 2.8% group larger than the 1% group? When you put the percentages in there, you don't really have to evaluate the height of these bars, but you can just review it by looking at the percentage. Now this completes the graphs for the categorical variable. Let's go back to our PowerPoint and look at the setup for our continuous variable. We're also going to describe this variable in words. We want to really mention what this label is about, what is the name of the variable, and what is the level of measurement. When we make a graph, SPSS actually produces the mean as well, and I show you where that lives. We're going to add a histogram, and we will place the normal curve in there. And of course, we will conclude with the social change that I will also talk about for the categorical variable. Let's go back to SPSS and find a fitting continuous variable. You bring up the data set again. Here we are. There's a variable here called number of hours worked. It lives near the bottom of the data set. How many hours do you work per week? Now for scale variables, sometimes researchers do not complete the values column, and here's an example of that. The values column has not been completed. But I know that hours worked is probably a ratio variable. I know that it has an absolute 0 point. That means no hours. And that every hour is exactly 1 hour more than the previous number and 1 hour less than the next number. So this is a fitting variable, fitting variable for a histogram. Let's click on Graphs, Legacy Dialogues. I'm bringing up the histogram, locating my variable. Let's make the box a little bigger, easier to see. How many hours per week do you work? I can drag that and drop it in the box, or alternatively, you may work with that arrow. Now you see something here that we didn't see for the categorical variables. We can display the normal curve, and I highly recommend that. We're not going to interpret that normal curve in this video, but in the next video, we'll have to interpret the normal curve. So we might as well get in the habit of clicking the normal curve. I'm going to click OK. And here is my graph. I can see that the mean and the standard deviation and the sample size was also produced here on the top right side of this graph. And the normal curve shows that this is a nicely positioned variable. It's in the middle of the x-axis. There's no real skewness to the left or to the right side, but I do see some kurtosis here in the middle. But that is not something that you have to critique at this moment. Now, you want to save your work. You don't want to lose all the work that you did in SPSS without saving that. And I have actually written here on this slide on how to save your graphs in SPSS. Always save your output files. Graphs are saved one at a time because that's how we set up our output files to bring these graphs over to Blackboard. So let's return to SPSS. Now this is what we call an output file. Output. I'm going to quickly save this so I don't lose my work. So all of this output will now be saved. File. Save my output file. And I'm going to call this just graphs. You can name it anything you want. I'd like to place that on my desktop. And this will be an output file, so it will get a .spv at the end. This has been saved. Now to bring these graphs over to Blackboard, and again, I have shared a PowerPoint here for that action as well, and please review that. I'm going to first show you how to do that, and then I'll talk you through it here again with this slide. I'm going to save my categorical graph first. For that, I'm going to double click inside the graph. I place my cursor on the graph and double click inside. And now I'm going to export this as a separate graph. This is a graphic file. And for that, I make sure that the graphics only is selected. That's confirmed by the fact that here on the graphics type, it is set as a JPEG, which is correct. And I now want to click the Browse button to make sure that I am saving this in the place where I want to save this, and then I name it with a name that helps me retrieve this. I'm going to set this on the desktop. This is the bar chart that I created, and I click Save and OK, and my bar chart has now been placed on the desktop. I'm going to do the same thing with my histogram. I right-click the histogram, I export this, I check that it's set to graphics only, my JPEG is in place. I'm going to click Browse. I'm going to call this histogram, and I make sure that this is on the desktop, and I click Save and OK. And I can bring up the desktop now, and I know that I have two files there, the graph and the histogram. As you can see, I have the bar chart here as a JPEG and the histogram as a JPEG. Now to bring this over to your Blackboard, I'm going to show you an example of a discussion post in Blackboard. And this is what that looks like. We're all familiar with that. When you reply to a discussion post, as we do when we create a discussion post, this is the box that comes up. The subject will be anything you would want that to be. For instance, bar chart, or categorical variable, or variables, variable description, however you want to call this, whatever the requirement in the classroom is for you. You can write your text here, introduction, and you can insert your graph here. And for that, we're going to use the insert or edit image. And when I click on that button, I actually end up in a different screen where I can now browse my computer and retrieve that specific file. It's called bar chart. I open that. I want to set the size of that. It always comes out a little bit too big for me, so I'm going to click the appearance button. And it's a matter of trial and error for you, but I always kind of have that. So 400 sounds about right, 425. The proportions are restrained, so if I change one, the other one also changes, and I can insert this now. Click OK. And now my chart is in that discussion post in a nice size. I can do this again for my your histogram. Insert histogram, and I will click on that option again. Insert edit image, browse my computer, use the histogram, open it, shrink the size with the appearance button. I will be consistent here and use 425 as well. And since the proportions are constrained, it will fix the other box of the dimensions, insert, click OK, and now I have the histogram in here as well. To review, start your post with a reply, write the text of your post, select image, locate your graph file on your computer, and shrink the size with the appearances dimensions option. And if you struggle with this process, then I highly recommend that you reach out to the customer care team. Our stats tutors at the Academic Skills Center can help you with this task to some extent, but we are not trained in Blackboard functions. So for detailed assistance, I recommend that you contact your customer care team via the portal of your Walden landing page. I still owe you an explanation for the social change for the variables that we selected. So let's go back to SPSS and review those graphs again. Here you see the histogram, how many hours per week do you work, and the gender variable where we created the pie chart, and the marital status variable where we created a bar chart. Now, just like the last video, I recommend that you hypothesize on what it would mean to put these two variables together and how one can drive positive social change. Think about the stakeholders, right? You always want to keep in mind who benefits from knowing and who wants to know. For instance, here, who would want to know about how many hours per week the two gender groups work? Who could benefit from knowing? Comes to mind is maybe the CDC, maybe the Labor Department, maybe different organizations on the private labor market, the public labor market, or the nonprofit labor market. The same goes for putting together, hypothetically, marital status and hours worked. Who are the stakeholders when we put those two variables together? Who wants to know and who benefits from knowing? And with this last review of social change, our presentation for the visual displays of data has come to an end.
Thank you for watching this video presentation. If you have course-level statistics questions, reach out to our stats tutors at statsupport@mail.waldenu.edu or view our statistics support resources at academicskills.waldenu.edu.